The night descends quietly. There is a cedar tree on this island that was alive when Rome fell. It was old when the Heian court was writing poetry. It was ancient when the samurai were fighting their wars. It does not know any of this. It is simply still growing. If these stories bring you peace, consider subscribing. And now, let us begin. You are on a ferry. Not the gentle ferry of the Seto Inland Sea, crossing 13 minutes of calm water between one coast and another. The ferry from Kagoshima to Yakushima crosses the Osumi Strait. Open water, exposed to the currents and the weather of the Pacific. The specific choppiness of a sea that has nothing to protect it from whatever the ocean sends. The crossing takes 4 hours. On rough days, more. When the island appears, it appears as a mountain. Not an island with a mountain on it. A mountain rising from the sea. The peaks of Yakushima are the highest in Kyushu, and the surrounding islands, reaching over 1,900 meters above sea level. The island's mass creates its own weather system. The warm, humid air of the Pacific rises against the slopes, cools, condenses. The result is rain. Extraordinary. Continuous, almost incomprehensible amounts of rain. The Japanese have a saying about Yakushima. It rains 35 days a month. This is an exaggeration. Not by much. The rain is the key to everything. The moisture that falls on Yakushima feeds rivers that run down the slopes in every direction, white and fast, cutting through the volcanic rock that the island is made of. It nourishes a forest so dense and so various that botanists who study it still find species relationships that challenge their existing models. It feeds, above everything else, the thing that Yakushima is most known for, the thing that has made this island a UNESCO World Heritage Site and a destination for people who travel from every part of the world, specifically to stand in the presence of what this island contains. The cedar trees, Yakusugi. The cedars of Yakushima, Cryptomeria japonica. The same species planted in forests throughout Japan, growing in every other place to a respectable size in a reasonable time, and then being harvested. On Yakushima, something different happens. The specific combination of the granite soil, the extraordinary rainfall, the specific altitude, the specific temperature range of the island's interior. These conditions produce cedars that grow extremely slowly, that accumulate resin throughout their tissues as they grow, and that develop a density and a rot resistance that allows them to survive for a very long time. How long? The oldest living Yakusugi, the Jomon Sugi, named for the Jomon period of Japanese prehistory that preceded the arrival of agriculture and the continental cultural influences that transformed Japan, is estimated to be between 2,000 and 7,000 years old. The uncertainty in that range is itself remarkable. The tree is so old that the dating methods available cannot narrow the range to less than 5,000 years. 2,000 years old at the minimum, 7,000 at the maximum. The tree was alive, certainly alive, possibly ancient, when Rome was at the height of its power, when the Silk Road was the primary channel of contact between the civilizations of East and West, when nothing that currently exists in the human world had yet been built. It is still alive. It is still growing. Not quickly. The growth rings of a Yakusugi, examined in cross-section, are extremely narrow. The slow growth rate that the difficult conditions of the island's interior impose is visible in the compression of decades into a few millimeters of wood. But the growth continues. The tree is not merely surviving, it is still doing what trees do, exchanging gas with the atmosphere, drawing water from the soil, converting sunlight into the chemical energy that adds, year by year, to the mass of what it already is. The Jomon Sugi was rediscovered in 1966. Not discovered. The people who lived on Yakushima had always known it was there. But it was not known to the wider world, not documented, not visited. A forestry worker named Sono Akira encountered it while mapping the island's timber resources and reported what he had found. The report generated attention. The attention generated more visits. The visits generated the awareness that this specific tree, in this specific location on this specific island, was one of the most remarkable living things on Earth. It is now protected. The path to it is a guided trail through the ancient forest, a journey that takes most visitors several hours each way. The trail is not easy. The terrain is steep. The roots of other enormous trees make the path uneven. The rain that makes the island what it is falls frequently on the people making the journey. They make it anyway. They come from every part of the world to stand at the base of a tree that has been growing for somewhere between 2,000 and 7,000 years. And when they arrive, they stand there, and they are quiet in the specific way that people are quiet when they encounter something that exceeds their capacity to respond. The tree is very large. It does not know that they have come. It is simply growing. The specific character of the other ancient cedars on the island, the Yakusugi that are younger than the Jomon Sugi but still measured in centuries, is worth attending to, because they are more accessible and in some ways more legible as objects of contemplation. The Jomon Sugi requires a full day's hiking to reach. The Wilson Stump, the enormous hollow base of a Yakusugi that was felled during the Edo-period for its timber, its interior now large enough to stand in, its age estimated at over 3,000 years at the time of its cutting, is reachable in a few hours on the standard trail, and is one of the most extraordinary natural objects in Japan. You stand inside the Wilson Stump and look up. The hollow interior of the base of a 3,000-year-old cedar tree frames a specific view of the sky above. A heart-shaped opening at the top of the hollow that has made it one of the most photographed natural features on the island. The specific shape, the coincidence of the opening that a very old hollow tree produces, and the form that human culture has associated with feeling, produces the specific response that very old things produce when they happen to speak in forms that the contemporary imagination can receive. But the stump itself is more than the view from inside it. It is the specific object of a tree that was alive for 3,000 years, and that was cut down to become the wooden elements of a human structure. A shrine, according to the accounts, though the specific structure is debated. The tree that gave itself, or was taken, without its knowledge, to become the material of something human. This is the specific moral complexity of wood as a material. The living thing, taken and transformed. The 3,000-year life ended to produce the specific quality of aged timber that the craftspeople of the Edo-period valued and needed. The stump remains. The tree does not. But the stump contains, in the specific rings of its cross-section, the record of 3,000 years of growth, of dry years and wet years, of the specific weather of the island across 3 millennia, of everything the tree experienced from the seedling stage to the enormous organism that the loggers encountered. The record is still there. In the wood, in the specific rings that no one is counting now, that are simply present in the stump that the rain has been weathering since the Edo period. 3,000 years of record, still there. The specific character of Yakushima's coastline, the dramatic contrast between the ocean-facing cliffs and the forested interior, is part of what makes the island feel like a world complete in itself, rather than simply a place in Japan. The coast of Yakushima is rocky and dramatic. The Pacific comes directly at it, not filtered through the enclosed waters of the Seto Inland Sea or the protected Bay of Kagoshima, but the open Pacific. The ocean that has traveled thousands of kilometers from the open water to arrive at this specific coast. The energy of this ocean is visible in the shape of the coastline. The specific forms that centuries of wave action have cut into the volcanic rock. The specific beaches of white sand that appear in the sheltered coves between the headlands. The sea around Yakushima is warm. The Kuroshio Current, the warm current that runs northward along the Pacific coast of Japan, passes close to the island, keeping the water temperature unusually high for this latitude. This warmth supports a coral reef ecosystem that is among the northernmost in Japan. A reef that exists because the Kuroshio brings the tropical water temperature that coral requires to an island that is geographically beyond the usual range of reef formation. The warm sea and the cold mountain. The coral reef at the base of the island and the Yakusugi at the summit. The subtropical coast and the subalpine interior. Yakushima contains within its small area. The island is roughly 20 kilometers across in its widest dimension, a greater range of ecosystems than many countries contain. From the coral and the subtropical vegetation of the coast, to the temperate forest of the middle slopes, to the subarctic scrub of the highest elevations, Yakushima passes through the ecological zones that a journey from the tropics to the subarctic would traverse. The specific reason for this compression is the altitude. The island rises so steeply from sea level to nearly 2,000 meters that the temperature gradient, the specific change in average temperature with elevation, produces, within a short horizontal distance, the range of conditions that would otherwise require a journey of thousands of kilometers along a north-south transect. The island is a continent in miniature. The forest is its heart. The cedar is its oldest citizen. Still growing. The specific moment when a visitor to the Jomon Sugi first sees the tree. The specific instant when the path turns and the enormous ancient cedar comes into view for the first time, is a moment that people who have experienced it consistently describe in similar terms. Silence. Not the silence of having nothing to say. The silence of having too much to say, and none of it adequate. The specific silence of encountering something that exceeds the categories you brought to the encounter. You walked for several hours. The forest was extraordinary throughout. The moss, the streams, the other large cedars along the path, the specific quality of light through a very dense ancient canopy. You were already in something remarkable. And then the path turns, and there is the Jomon Sugi. And what you already found remarkable becomes merely context. The tree is enormous. Photographs communicate the scale imperfectly, because photographs always lack the context that the body provides. The specific sense of your own scale relative to the thing you are encountering. Standing before the Jomon Sugi, your body understands its own smallness in a way that no photograph of the tree can produce. The specific texture of the bark, deeply furrowed, the ridges and valleys of the ancient cedar's surface visible from the viewing platform, that keeps visitors far enough from the tree that the root system and the soil around it are not damaged by the compaction of thousands of feet, is visible even from the distance the platform maintains. The bark of a very old Yakusugi is distinctive. The resin that the tree accumulates over centuries has saturated the outer layers of the wooden bark, giving them a specific color and texture that younger trees do not have. This texture is the visible evidence of the time, not the time measured in calendars or in the specific events of human history. The time measured in the specific physical processes of a tree's growth, the accumulation of resin, the deepening of the bark ridges, the specific changes that occur over centuries to the surface of a living organism that has been exposed to the specific conditions of this specific place for this specific length of time. You are seeing time, made visible in bark, in the specific texture of a surface that has been accumulating for somewhere between 2,000 and 7,000 years. Be quiet for a moment. The tree deserves the quiet. The forest of Yakushima's interior, the forest in which the Jomon Sugi and the other ancient cedars grow, has a specific character that photographs do not capture and that words do not fully reach. The first quality is the moss. Everything in this forest is covered in moss, not the patchy moss of ordinary damp environments, the comprehensive, total, every surface moss of a place that receives so much moisture so continuously that bare surfaces are the exception and moss is the rule. The roots of the great cedars disappear under moss. The fallen trunks of trees that died centuries ago are covered in moss so thick that they have become raised features of the ground, obstacles to navigate, or in many cases, platforms from which new trees grow. The rocks of the stream bed are covered in moss. The branches of the living trees carry moss that hangs from them in the specific way that humidity and constant moisture allow moss to grow on surfaces that would be dry elsewhere. The green of this moss is a specific green. Not the bright green of a lawn in sunlight, not the dark green of a forest floor in ordinary temperate climates. The specific green of moss that grows in extraordinary moisture, under the filtered light of a very dense canopy. A color that is simultaneously vivid and deep, that has the quality of luminosity without the quality of brightness, that seems to generate its own light from within rather than reflecting what falls from above. Walking through this forest, on the trails that preserve the ancient trees from the damage of uncontrolled human traffic, while making them accessible to the visitors who come to see them, is an experience of being inside something, not the ordinary sense of being inside a forest, which is simply the experience of being surrounded by trees and their associated vegetation. The specific experience of being inside a world that is operating according to principles different from the ones that govern the world outside it. The time scale is different. The scale of the organisms is different. The relationship between the living and the dead is different. In this forest, dead trees are not absent. They are present as structures on which new life grows, as the substrate from which the next generation emerges, as the specific form that ancient things take when they have finally stopped being alive in the conventional sense but have not stopped being part of the forest's life. The ancient cedars that have died are not gone. Their wood is too dense, too resin-impregnated, too resistant to decomposition to disappear in any time frame that a human life can observe. They lie where they fell, or lean against the trees that neighbor them, or stand as hollow shells of what they were, and the forest grows from them, on them, around them. The boundary between the living tree and the dead wood of the tree that fell 500 years ago is not a clear boundary. It is a gradient, a continuous process of transformation in which what was one thing becomes the substrate for another thing becoming. This is time at a different scale. The Yakushima forest does not operate on human time. The processes that shape it, the growth of the cedars, the accumulation of the moss, the transformation of the fallen trunks into the substrate for new growth, operate on timescales that exceed any human lifetime and most human institutions. The forest that exists today is the result of processes that began thousands of years before anyone who is currently alive was born. The forest that will exist thousands of years from now will be the result of processes that are beginning today, in the growth of the seedlings that are pushing up through the moss of the forest floor right now. To be in this forest is to be in the middle of a process that has no beginning or end within any human frame of reference. This is not an abstract understanding. It is an experience. The specific quality of standing among trees that have been growing for 2,000 years, in a forest that has been continuous for much longer than that, in a place that has been receiving rain from the Pacific for longer than human civilization has existed. This quality is felt in the body before it is understood by the mind. The body knows it is small. The body knows it is temporary. The body knows it is in the presence of something that was here long before it arrived and will be here long after it leaves. This knowing is not frightening. It is, for most people who experience it, something closer to relief. The relief of not being the most important thing. The relief of being for a moment small within something very large. The specific relief of a forest that has been growing for thousands of years and will continue to grow for thousands more, indifferent to the human concerns that feel so urgent in the world outside its canopy. The rain falls on Yakushima 35 days a month. The moss grows. The cedar adds its fraction of a millimeter of new wood. The ancient things continue. The specific animals of Yakushima, the Yakushima macaque and the Yakushima deer, both subspecies found only on this island, shaped by thousands of years of island evolution into forms distinct from their mainland relatives, are part of what makes the forest experience on Yakushima different from any other forest experience in Japan. The Yakushima macaque is smaller than the mainland Japanese macaque. The island's conditions, the specific diet available, the specific climate, the specific selective pressures of an island environment have produced, over thousands of generations, a monkey that is distinguishably different from the continental form. The same species, shaped by the same evolutionary processes, but shaped by the specific conditions of this specific island. On the trails of the forest interior, the macaques are present. Not timidly, they have coexisted with the limited human presence on the island for long enough that the sight of hikers does not disturb them. They go about their business in the forest while the hikers go about theirs on the trail. The specific quality of this coexistence, two species occupying the same space without the specific fear that human-animal encounters in most contemporary contexts produce, is one of the most distinctive things about the Yakushima experience. The deer are similar. The Yakushima deer, smaller than the mainland sika deer, dark-coated. With the specific build that island conditions have produced over thousands of years, are present throughout the forest at lower elevations. They are not alarmed by human presence. They move through the moss and the roots of the ancient cedars with the specific ease of animals that have been doing this in this specific forest for much longer than any human has been watching them. To walk through the Yakushima forest is to walk through a world in which human beings are recent arrivals. The macaques were here before the first humans came to the island. The deer were here. The ancient cedars were here. The forest was already in its current form. The moss-covered, rain-drenched, ancient organism-populated forest before the first humans set foot on the island. You are walking through something that does not need you, that was fully itself before you came, that will be fully itself after you leave. This understanding, available in the specific quality of a forest that has been developing for thousands of years and that contains organisms that have been here since before human memory, is one of the most valuable experiences that Yakushima offers. You are a guest. A welcome one, perhaps, but a guest. The forest receives you with the specific indifference of something that is too old to be particularly affected by your presence. Walk gently. The moss takes a very long time to grow. The specific phenomenon of the ancient cedar's relationship to the rain, the extraordinary rainfall of Yakushima, and the specific way that the Yakusugi have adapted to it over millennia, is one of the most interesting examples of the long-term evolutionary relationship between an organism and its environment. The rainfall of Yakushima is not merely abundant. It is continuous, arriving in multiple forms. The torrential rain of the typhoon season, the steady drizzle that the marine air produces when it rises against the slopes, the specific mist that forms in the forest interior, when the temperature gradient between the humid air and the cooler canopy creates condensation that falls as fog drip from the leaves of the trees. This multiform moisture regime, the combination of direct rain and fog drip, and the specific humidity that persists even in the dry season, has shaped the Yakusugi over thousands of generations of selection. The trees that survived in these conditions were the trees whose specific physiology could make use of the moisture, while also managing the specific challenges it presents. The waterlogged soil that excludes oxygen from the roots, the weight of the moss that accumulates on every surface, the specific fungal and bacterial community that the continuous moisture supports. The Yakusugi that exist now are the descendants of the trees that manage these challenges most successfully. Each tree is a specific solution, developed over its own lifetime, and shaped by the selection that produced it, to the specific problem of being a very large tree in a very wet environment on a very steep slope of volcanic granite. The Jomon Sugi solution has been working for somewhere between 2,000 and 7,000 years. It is, by that measure, an extremely successful solution, more successful than any human institution of comparable age, more successful than any human-made structure that existed when it was a seedling. The cedar does not know this. It is simply doing what it does, being a tree in the rain, very, very successfully, for a very long time. The specific rivers of Yakushima, the rivers that run from the summit to the sea, white and fast, cold even in summer, are one of the most distinctive features of the island's landscape, and one of the most important elements of what makes the forest what it is. The rivers of Yakushima are young rivers. Not young in the geological sense. The island has been above sea level for a very long time. Young in the specific hydrological sense that rivers carved by the rainfall of a very wet island on steep volcanic slopes are young, fast, energetic, still actively cutting their channels, full of the specific kinetic energy that the combination of gradient and water volume produces. the water is extraordinarily clear. The specific clarity of water that has fallen as rain, filtered through the volcanic granite of the island's slopes, gathered into streams and rivers, without passing through the agricultural and industrial environments that muddy the rivers of Japan's more populated regions. The rocks of the riverbeds are visible through the water with a clarity that makes the specific colors of the rocks, the gray granite, the occasional rust of iron-bearing minerals, unusually vivid. Standing in the middle of a Yakushima river, which you can do on a warm day with appropriate footwear, you are in water that fell as rain perhaps days ago. Water that was clouds over the Pacific last week. Water that has passed through the filter of the island's granite in the specific time between falling and arriving here. The coldness of the water is part of it. The specific cold of a river that runs from a high summit through old forest. The cold that comes from altitude and from shade, from the specific thermal conditions of water that has not been warmed by prolonged exposure to direct sun. This cold is invigorating in the specific way that cold, clean water in a hot climate is invigorating. The body responds immediately. The awareness sharpens. The specific quality of being physically present in a specific place becomes unusually acute. The water has been here for a very short time. The rocks it runs over have been here for a very long time. This contrast, the water, newest thing in the forest, running over the rocks, oldest thing in the landscape, is the specific dynamic of the Yakushima River. New and old, moving and still, both present, both necessary, both part of what the island is. The specific experience of being on Yakushima at night, in the interior of the island, in the forest, away from the small towns that occupy the coastal strip, is an experience of darkness that most people who have grown up in or near cities have never had. Not the darkness of a cloudy night in the city, where the light of the city is reflected off the clouds and the sky is never fully dark. Not the darkness of the countryside near a city, where the glow of the urban areas is always present on the horizon. The darkness of a forest on an island in the Pacific, far from any significant source of artificial light, under a sky that is not interfered with by anything human. This darkness is complete in a way that disorients the vision that is accustomed to the ambient light of inhabited spaces. Complete in a way that requires the eyes to fully dark adapt, the process by which the rods of the retina, which are more sensitive to low light than the cones that function in bright conditions, gradually achieve their maximum sensitivity. This process takes approximately 30 minutes. In 30 minutes, in true darkness, the world resolves from blackness into the specific, low-light world that the dark-adapted eye can navigate. The stars. In the darkness of Yakushima's interior on a clear night, the stars are extraordinary. Not the familiar scattering of bright points that city dwellers can see in clear weather. The few hundred stars that survive the light pollution of inhabited areas. The full sky, the Milky Way visible as a physical structure, as a band of light, rather than a vague brightening of one part of the sky, with the specific depth and density of light that reveals it as a collection of millions of stars rather than a diffuse glow. This sky was always there. It is the same sky that was above the ancient cedars when they were seedlings. It is the sky that the Jomon people saw when they lived on this island thousands of years ago, before the cedars that now exist had begun to grow. The sky has not changed. The cedar has not changed. What has changed is the capacity of the people who look at them to be present to what they are looking at. The specific quality of Yakushima, the quality that makes people travel from every part of the world to stand in its forests and look at its trees, is not the beauty in the conventional sense, although the beauty is real. It is the encounter with time. The encounter with a scale of time that the ordinary world does not make available, that the ordinary pace of human life does not require a confrontation with. The Jomon Sugi does not care that people have come to look at it. It was growing before the concept of a visitor existed. It will be growing after the last person who has visited it is long gone. Its indifference to the human attention it receives is not rudeness. It is the specific character of something that is so much older than human attention, that the attention is simply irrelevant to what it is. And in this indifference, in the specific quality of something that continues regardless of whether it is observed, there is something that the person who has traveled to this island and stood at the base of this tree often describes as the most peaceful thing they have encountered. The peace of something that does not need your attention to be what it is. The peace of a world that was here before you and will be here after you and is not organized around you at all. This peace is available to you right now. Not from Yakushima. You are not on Yakushima. But from the understanding that Yakushima represents. From the awareness that the world you inhabit is much older than the problems that fill it, much more durable than the concerns that feel urgent, much larger than the specific moment you are in. The cedar was growing when Rome fell. It is still growing. Whatever you are carrying tonight, whatever the weight of the day, whatever the concerns that the night has not yet dissolved, these are real. They are yours. They deserve attention. They are also smaller than a cedar tree that has been growing for 7,000 years. Both things are true simultaneously. The concerns are real. They are small within something very large. Sleep now. Let the forest continue without you tonight. It will. The specific concept that Yakushima most fully embodies, the concept that the forest and the ancient cedars make visible and tangible and inescapable, is the concept that Japanese philosophy calls ma in its temporal dimension. Not the ma of space, the meaningful gap between things, the silence between notes, the ma of time, the specific quality of a moment that exists within something much larger than itself. The awareness that what is happening now is embedded in a time frame that extends far beyond the now in both directions. The ancient cedar has been growing through 10,000 nows. Each day of its existence, each sunrise, each rainfall, each frost, each accumulation of a fraction of a millimeter of new wood, was a now for the tree. The tree did not experience the span. It experienced the specific conditions of each day, the specific weather, the specific soil moisture, the specific light through the canopy. The span is visible only from outside, only from the position of something, someone, who can look at the whole and understand what the accumulation of 10,000 years of nows has produced. You are that someone, and you can see the span. The tree cannot. This is the specific gift that human consciousness provides. The ability to perceive duration, to understand that the thing you are looking at has a history and a future that extends beyond the moment of observation. The tree does not know it is ancient. You know the tree is ancient. In this knowing, in the specific awareness of a thing that has been accumulating its years for longer than human civilization, something happens. The urgency of your own now becomes relative. The specific concerns of the specific day become, briefly, smaller. Not unimportant. The concerns are still yours, and they are still real, but smaller relative to the scale of what you are perceiving. The cedar has been here longer than your concerns. It will be here after your concerns have resolved, one way or another. This is not a reason to dismiss the concerns. It is a reason to hold them with a slightly lighter grip. The forest is growing in the dark tonight. The ancient cedars are adding their fractions of millimeters. The moss is accumulating moisture from the air. The macaques are sleeping in the branches. All of it continuing without you. All of it completely fine without you. You can rest tonight. The forest has it? Sleep now. The specific tradition of the people who have lived on Yakushima. The islanders who have fished its waters and farmed its coastal strips and worked its forests for generations. Is a tradition of living alongside the ancient, of inhabiting a space that has always been more than human. The Yakusugi were logged during the Edo-period, not the oldest ones. The wood of the most ancient trees is so saturated with resin that it was difficult to work with conventional tools and was largely left. But the trees of intermediate age, those between 500 and 1,000 years old, which were old enough to have the specific wood density that made them valuable, but not so dense as to be unworkable. These were felled and their timber transported to the mainland for use in shrine and temple construction. The people who did this logging were not unaware of what they were cutting. The specific reverence for the old trees that is part of the island's cultural tradition. The understanding that the ancient cedars are not ordinary trees, that they occupy a different category of existence, was present alongside the practical need to work the forest for its timber. This coexistence of reverence and use is characteristic of traditional relationships with the natural world everywhere. Not the preservation of the ancient at the expense of the practical, not the exploitation of the practical without acknowledgement of the sacred. Both, simultaneously, with the specific difficulty of holding both simultaneously that any genuine moral complexity requires. The islanders held this complexity. They logged the middle-aged trees and left the ancient ones. They took what the forest could give without taking what the forest could not regenerate. This is not a perfect system. The logging changed the forest. The specific composition of the middle elevation forest on Yakushima is different from what it would have been if the logging had not occurred. The ancient trees were left, but they were left in a forest that had changed around them. And the forest recovered. Or rather, the forest continued. In the specific way the forests continue, which is not by returning to what they were, but by becoming what they are given the conditions that currently exist. The conditions are now good. The logging stopped. The island was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The forest is protected. The ancient trees continue. The middle-aged trees that were cut have been replaced by new trees, which will become the middle-aged trees of the future. The forest is always becoming. The ancient cedars are always there, both things simultaneously. The island holds them. Sleep now. I'll see you in the next story.